A doctor in New York, a man who would become one of the lead founders of oncology and a soon-to-be renowned immunologist, was dead set on proving that his ideas were true. It had taken him numerous clinical trials, but today was the day that he was finally going to prove himself right. That cancer couldn't be given to a person, it could only develop and spread. Slowly, he injected a syringe full of live cancer cells into yet another patient at the Ohio State Prison. He had seriously believed that his hypothesis was correct, and that the years' worth of cumulative evidence presented in front of him wasn't really relevant. 1963 was the year when he was finally put on probation for only 1 year after being reported to the New York Medical Board. Even after the countless amounts of people that were directly harmed as a result of said experiments came out against him, the doctor responsible, Chester M. Southam, still refused to acknowledge that his ideas might have been wrong. You'll probably all be thinking about how unreasonable it was of him to still follow in his delusions and ignore clear-cut evidence presented in front of him, but the thing is, we as humans aren't naturally susceptible to change. How would you feel if you were put in a similar situation? Most likely negative, that's for sure. That's a common response considering if something you had wholeheartedly believed in was suddenly proved to be false. Now, this leads us to the curious and ever so complex question about human nature. Why is it so difficult for us as people to have our ideas challenged? It doesn't differ when we're talking about political beliefs, scientific theories, or something as simple as what kind of coffee is the best. It's a cappuccino, by the way. We all have a biological, psychological, and an emotional resistance to altering our own opinions, a full-on flight or fight response that kicks in when we see something or encounter something that may not align with our previous worldviews. Now, a really good example of this would be the introduction of the Big Bang Theory. Now, as many of you will have already heard, the Big Bang Theory was a revolutionary theory that changed the way we view and perceive the world. It was first publicized by George Lemaitre in 1927, and it had proposed the idea of an eternal universe, one stemming from a singular point. However, when it was introduced, it wasn't taken as an idea. It was taken as blasphemy. Hundreds and thousands of people, stemming from political leaders to even scientific researchers, tried to disprove Lemaitre's theory, and as you can tell, they really didn't take this very well. The common denominator about introducing new ideas is that no one accepts it or even respects it at first. The Big Bang Theory? It was no exception to this, and countless amounts of people tried to deny and disprove Lemaitre's notion with that of a static universe. Now, many of you will probably be thinking that you're an exception to this, that you're probably a little bit more reasonable than the peers around you. But the thing is, no matter how logical and reasonable we try to be, we just aren't. We as humans are emotional creatures. Now, this leads us to a really interesting question. Why does it feel like we're being attacked when our opinions or beliefs are challenged? Well, this gum-shaped blob in your brain, called the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for processing fear, activates when we encounter something bizarre or unfamiliar to us. So that means that when we encounter something that we may not feel comfortable with or may feel unfamiliar to us, our brains react the exact same way as it would to being, let's say, attacked by a bear a few 100,000 years ago. This other part of the brain is called the prefrontal cortex. It's the part of the brain that's responsible for reasoning. However, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex both activate at the same time, and the emotional response from the prefrontal cortex often overpowers that amygdala. And this leads us to a really interesting phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance. It's this uncomfortable tension that arises when we're put in an unfamiliar or an uncomfortable situation, just like I'm being put here, speaking in front of all of you. Now, to relieve this tension, we will often try to cling on to illogical or outdated beliefs, even denying the truth, so that we can feel just a little bit more comfortable. And this means that to the people who are deeply invested in the idea of a static universe, one where it had a definite beginning and an end, Lemaitre's notion had felt like an attack to them. People really felt threatened by what was just a theory. And both these examples go to show that it's not just larger communities that may feel attacked or threatened by individuals, but also individuals that may feel threatened by larger communities or groups of people's ideas. So just as the Big Bang Theory was attacked by countless amounts of communities, an individual, Chester M. Southam, felt threatened and attacked by hundreds of communities telling him that he might have been wrong. So, what does this all mean? Why does this matter? And how does this relate back to us? Well, just by seeing that we ourselves aren't susceptible to change can lead us to understanding that we are made to be stubborn. And just by understanding and overcoming that fact can help us open our minds and our mental gateways to so many new experiences and opportunities that we may have never even considered or thought of before. And so when you're placed in an argument, you have to keep in mind that you're not just challenging someone's ideas or opinions, but you're also challenging their sense of identity, their sense of security, and even as far as their survival instincts. It's not just a blockade in their mental you're encountering, but it's also their biology, their psychology, and their sheer human resistance to change. So the next time you find yourself in an argument or a disagreement and the other party isn't immediately convinced by your amazing factual words, try to keep in mind, maybe it's not because your words have a flaw in them, or maybe it's not because they're not listening, but maybe it's because they're human, just like you and me. Thank you.